Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you for joining the session today, which really holds the intention, no, to be a debrief for CSW 67, which just wrapped up, and also a space to begin strategizing from the lessons that we've learned in CSW 67 towards CSW 68. It's a great pleasure to invite Coach Stephen Lin, Interim Executive Director of the North American Men Engaged Network, who's going to lead us through a welcoming activity. No, Coach Lin, over to you.
Good morning and good afternoon, good day to everyone. And thank you again, Jen, for this incredible work, both pre, during, and post CSW 67. I know today we're going to be discussing many of the outcomes, some of the obstacles that were before us. But I'm here to say, as an active participant, it was incredible in every way. And it was a complete win on our part. Contrary to what some would say, it was just fantastic. So good morning. As I said before, everybody, today we're going to be going through lots of exercises, as Jennifer mentioned. We also have some great speakers, some great information, as well as some inspirational messages coming to you to get us ready for CSW 68. It's only a few months away, but the lessons that we've learned through this year, we're going to apply to next year to make us stronger, smarter, wiser, and more effective. And I'm just so excited for CSW 68. I can't wait. And I look forward to seeing you all back here in New York City. All right, so we're going to do what we do, the Mentimeter, if you can. The Mentimeter, as you all know, is through your phone. We're asking that you go to menti.com and put in this code, if you will, right now. This is going to be able to give us some information, a survey for those of you who have never done the Mentimeter before. But it's really giving us some data as Jen and her team are putting together the plans for CSW 68 and beyond. All right? So let's all do that. Let's go to menti.com on your phones and put in your code 52428776. All right? And when you get that, you'll be getting some prompts. Here we go. First question. What issues presented during CSW 67 were of specific importance in your work within the gender justice field? There were several issues presented. Here are 4 in particular. This is going to be able to give us some kind of guidance as far as drafting and working next year to make sure that the topics and issues most important are related. Addressing technical communication disparity within the Global South, identifying promising practices and challenges in work to engage men and boys, transform patriarchal masculinities in gender justice, understanding the feminist, LGBTIQ, and youth positions and agendas on gender equality and this year's theme. And last, understanding gender discrimination, violence, and backlash faced by women, girls, and LGBTIQ people in the digital spheres. Great topics, all critical in our work. Beautiful. All right. Now we'll go to the second question. Did you or your organization attend the CSW 67 conference, either live or one of the virtual parallel events? If not, why? And you'll be able to see all the prompts below. Did you or your organization attend the CSW 67 conference, either live or one of the virtual parallel events of many? If not, why were you not in attendance? Several reasons why and we understand that. But we just want to make sure that you have every opportunity next year to be a part of it, one way or the other. We need your voice. Looks like we got a good snapshot. Seems like everyone was intended. Those here either attended in person or virtually. Good. We also seeing that some of them coordinating the efforts, the logistics was a little challenging. We're going to be talking about that today. Jen has really jumped on that immediately. So she'll be presenting that today about some of the things that have been presented to us in that manner. Beautiful, beautiful. So we want to thank you all for participating in that. That's very helpful, as you could imagine. Now we'll be able to use that, as I said before, in crafting the CSW 68 based on your knowledge and your survey and your needs, your objectives, because you're an equal part on this team. We all win. Everybody plays. Nobody sits on the bench. Craig and I say that all the time. But it's true in this fashion that all of our voices are needed more than ever now. Thanks, Jen. Back over to you.
Thank you, Coach. Yeah, interesting to see the results. And as we suspected, some colleagues know with potential visa challenges, we're going to strategize precisely on how we can better organize internally to overcome some of those challenges next year and to better support each other. Wonderful. So excited to move into the conversation today. If we can maybe share our presentation, it'll be with great pleasure that I introduce our next colleague. And right now we're going to just quickly go into an overview, what happened at CSW. So a quick debrief of this year's commission on the status of women. And next slide, please. And thanks for coming on screen. I see our colleague already, Anthony Keaty, Masculinity's Technical Advisor at ABOD. It's wonderful to have you. Over to you to lead us through this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Hello, everyone. It is, again, a huge pleasure to be here with you all and to be able to present a little bit on what's happened this year at CSW. My name is Anthony Kade. I am the Masculinities Technical Advisor at ABAD, Resource Center for Gender Equality in Lebanon, Men Engage Alliance members for the Lebanon Country Network, and hopefully a MENA region network soon coming. So without further ado, the topic at this year's CSW was, can I get the next slide? Thank you so much. So the CSW this year was from the 6th to the 17th of March, and the major theme of the CSW was innovation and technological change and education in digital age, progress towards gender equality. It did not mean that all themes that were addressed in parallel events or side events had to fit that theme, but that this was a general theme that everyone was working around. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so some interesting numbers just to kind of take a snapshot of the scope of the CSW. 7,000, there were more than 7,000 participants who traveled to New York City for CSW 67, and 15,000 NGOs and CSOs that attended the CSW events online and in person. So that's quite a large number. 4 heads of state were present in person at the CSW, as well as 116 government ministers who attended. There were 205 official side events that took place within the United Nations complex. And these side events are taking place literally on the sides of the official policy discussion taking place between the member states, and that's why they're side events. And you usually need to register to have permission to get into those, to have access to the UN complex for the side events. And then there were 700 parallel events that were organized as part of an NGO CSW forum, which is a civil society organized space for grassroots movements and for civil society to gather and to influence the overall agenda, to put pressure on stakeholders, and also to convene and to collaborate and to experience power with, as hopefully we all do. Next slide, please. And so now I forgot to mention at the beginning of my presentation, for 2 reasons. Number one, so you won't have to hear my voice the entire time. And secondly, because any recipe tastes better with more flavor and more diversity. I will be asking at several points for several colleagues who were at the CSW to please just join in and share your experiences, specifically when we come to the caucus and some side event points. And twice I will call upon Jenny to come and share her knowledge and her expertise with us to explain a little bit of the technical issues behind these things we're showing you right now. So, Jenny, do you think I could bother you to come on and help us with this next slide?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I think just to highlight here, no, that again, it was another super tense political negotiation. Unfortunately, that is quite standard, no? Increasingly, this one ending at 4 a.m. in the morning on the last day of, and so the negotiations hinge on a successful adoption and agreement, no, on how we will advance the normative framework within the session's priority theme. And more than 50 members engaged in CSW this year. So that was quite a high number. It was wonderful to see everyone and connect. And that was quite a large number, especially noting that since 2019, when COVID hit, no, CSW has been virtual, and this was the first year that it returned to full presential format, although it did maintain some virtual elements, no, for those who were not able to join in person, and that will continue to be contemplated in sessions in the future, knowing New York is still a very expensive space. We're having incredible challenges with visas. Some of our members, and we'll discuss this further, hearing that they have a 1 year lag time in being able to obtain a visa. So continuing to host it in person in New York is a political decision that has implications, no? So we were fortunate to have 50 members who were able to still attend. Thanks. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. So now we want to maybe take a pause in just the numbers. Next slide, please. And one thing that so here we have a picture of the CSW Interactive Youth Dialogue with Nyasha delivering a joint statement on behalf of the Men Engage Alliance, and we are very lucky to hear from them later on to talk about this experience. So look forward to that. Next slide, please. Another really wonderful thing that the Men Engage Alliance was able to do for the members who were able to travel to New York for the CSW was to convene 2 caucus meetings for Men Engage Member Alliance and those who were interested in engaging men and interested to know more about the network. And really, these were spaces, and here, please, I invite any of our friends and colleagues who were present to please feel free to share your experiences. We really would love to hear from many people what these experiences were like for them and what these spaces meant for them. For myself, these meetings took place at 2 points, once at the very beginning of the CSW and once at the midpoint of the CSW when many of the members were leaving because, again, even resources for being able to stay long is not always a given. And these spaces for myself were, I found them to be very warm. I think that's the first thing that popped into my head when I think of this space. It felt like reconvening with friends. It felt too long since we had been able to speak to one another face to face and to tangibly be with one another. And there was an energy there, and it felt really good. It felt at home, even though I was meeting so many new people in this space, along with some dear friends that I hadn't seen in a while. I felt this space was very positive, but it was also very critical. And I loved that. We were very positive about the fact that we are still able to convene, that this still is a space that is politically charged, that we still have an impetus that we want to create a catalyst for change, and that we're probably missing some opportunities that we could utilize for the future and how we could really convene all of us together and utilize the power with so many activists being in the same space at the same time to really try to influence the agenda and make a statement. At the same time, as Jenny alluded to earlier, it was also a very critical conversation where we did express feelings of even marginalization at times, not only the parallel events being outside of the complex, but the way civil society was treated, or the way many members did not feel that voices were properly being heard, but rather a platform was made to keep civil society appeased but more quiet. So these were very rich conversations that were happening, and I felt that it was a very safe, transparent, a place for transparent conversations for me, where people could also share their own personal experience, journeys, and feelings. So I really appreciated that space. I wonder if anyone else is here who was also there and if they would like to take a minute or two to also share their experience. Perhaps they could raise their hand if anyone would like to share that with us. It would be very appreciated. I'm not seeing any hands. Oh, here we go, Kelly. Thank you so much. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, yeah, I'll just hop in here with two things. Very much agree with some of the things that you said there, Anthony. I think for me, the first thing I would highlight about why it's such a great space was that for me, I became connected with the Men Engaged Alliance during COVID. So it was really the first time in which there was actually a physical space for me to meet with many of these people, such as yourself, Anthony, who I've been in several online meetings with you. So it was really delightful just to meet a lot of faces that I'd seen before online, and kind of reinforced why it's great to have these types of physical meetups every once in a while. And I guess the other point for me was that really helpful about this was, and something I'll go into a little bit later when we're talking about youth experiences, but I just had some different complicated feelings at the beginning of CSW about from everything from why it was so complicated to get into some of the side events at the UN, just to some of the other events that were going on. So I really appreciated being able to come to this midway point and have a space of people where we could kind of have more open, frank conversations about what was kind of complicated or challenging about CSW, and kind of helped me put words and understanding to the more complicated feelings I was having. So to me, it was really great to have this midpoint checkup. So,
Kelly, thank you so much for that. That was so well put, and so appreciative that you were able to have that space and share those experiences with us. And we look forward to hearing more from you later on, my friend. Thank you so much. And it was such a good pleasure to meet you. Again, to all our colleagues who were not there, hopefully soon we do have opportunities to meet in person, because it is quite worth it if possible. Maybe we can move on to the next slide in the interest of time. Thank you. And also, please, our friends are also sharing on the chat, so please feel free to interact there as well. There were so many Men Engaged Alliance member events at CSW 67, both parallel and side events. The Men Engaged Alliance media team and the whole team actually is working really hard to make all of these available. Those that were recorded online, and even updating that very regularly. So please visit the website and feel free to watch those videos and gain that knowledge, even if we weren't able to be present at the moment. Next slide, please. And just to maybe take a little bit of a zoom in on one particular side event, and again, inviting anyone now, if you would raise your hands, anyone who attended this event, who would like to maybe give your own impression of the event, or any things that you walked away from. But this is one of the events that was at the CSW, a parallel event. And the discussions were mainly centered around feminist conundrums working on and with men and boys and on masculinities. And I was lucky to be involved slightly with this side event, as the director of Abad, my director, Ms. Rida Anani, was one of the speakers. And one of the things that was really wanted from this particular side event was for there, again, to be a transparent space where feminists who believe in engaging men and masculinities, or who have some issues with it, can continue to have conversations, transparent and safe conversations about that. Something that there has been a great effort from many actors working in and around the field for many years, and this was partly continuing that conversation, but also allowing a space for people to talk about conundrums, about being perhaps a man working in the field, but still feeling awkward in some spaces, or still dealing with male privilege while and checking one's own male privilege while trying to be a role model for others. So it just became a very rich conversation. I didn't see any hands. Is there anyone who would like to share anything about this specific side event? And if not, completely understood. And anyway, I don't want to take up too much time. So here we go. Thank you, Karen, please. Very appreciated. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Lovely to see you, Anthony, and the rest of the colleagues. So what was really interesting for me, I found this space very refreshing, because I think there were conversations that are often, or conundrums that are often thrown at us as organizations and people working with men and boys, especially women-led organizations. And I was just looking over some notes from that session. And the one thing that really stood out for me was the question about which men and boys are we actually engaging? And I think that's been something that I was able to take back to Mosaic, the organization that I'm with, to really say, like, what is our intention? Who are we engaging, and how are we engaging them, and for what purpose? And just one other thing that stood out for me was, I think it was Bafana Kamalo who said, we don't praise a fish for swimming, so why do we praise men for parenting? And that was just something that really stuck with me out the session. But I think we need more spaces like this, and it would be great to see these open conversations where we can really start unpacking these conundrums.
Karen, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. I actually remember those same takeaways and having those same takeaways. That is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So this is probably where I will have to give off, because I will once again hand over to Jenny, and she will share her expertise and knowledge when we talk about the final agreements of the CSW and an initiative that the Men Engage Alliance actually had during the CSW. So thank you for having me, and Jenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and for all colleagues for sharing. Yeah, we'll just move through these last few slides rather quickly to wrap up this, what happened at CSW, with just a little bit of the technical analysis. But first, on an effort that we developed jointly as Men Engage, under this contemplation that we've been exploring of how do we become how do we increase our activism, not just our policy advocacy, but our tactical, shall we say, repertoire of activism actions. So we thought this year, let's develop a joint statement, particularly contributing in a meaningful way, hopefully, to feminists, LGBTIQ, and youth colleagues already at CSW, the analysis of men and masculinities as it related to this year's theme, which we had quite a lot of rich analysis, of how patriarchal masculinities and the rise of the manosphere, within the digital space is really creating some incredible challenges. So we drafted a collective statement and then sent it out, and had 171 members and partners who joined. And then as a follow-up action, we sent it via email and also connected with policymakers via social media, and reached out to all the CSW Bureau. There's a regional representative for each region that constitutes the CSW Bureau, as well as the Bureau Chair. We also reached out to the UN Secretary General and UN Women ED, the ED's office. And we did receive a response from the UN Women Executive Director's Office in appreciation for the statement. We did end up sending it quite towards the end, last few days of the negotiation, compelling policymakers to take bold and progressive political steps to ensure a positive outcome, especially as the negotiation was continuing to be quite tense. So we'll continue this. This is something we want to strategize today. How do we improve our activism within these spaces, no? And this was just one sort of experiment that we ran this year to gain collective support and to be more political. Thanks so much. Next slide. And then very quickly, just a few slides on what actually came out in the agreed conclusions, no? So the document was adopted. That's good. That means there was commitment, no, by the international multilateral community towards this year's theme. There isn't always agreement. So the fact that we have an adopted agreed conclusions was positive. And in terms of achievements, no, in the language that was negotiated, there was a strong recognition of adolescent girls and recognized, no, for being the most digitally connected generation in history, and that means that they can disproportionately face discrimination and violence. Also, some good language added on online sexual and gender-based violence and the addition of non-consensual, no, sharing of sexually explicit content, which is an incredible problem, no, of the manosphere and the online digital space. And also in digital governance, there was some really strong language around the fact that human rights must be central and integrated into all phases of technology, from design, development, evaluation, regulation, and the role of all women, girls, and LGBTIQ people in that. Thanks so much. Next slide. And then, of course, some of the challenges, no? And that is the lack of protection of the human rights of LGBTIQ people and comprehensive sexuality education. We're going to hear more about this in the opposition monitoring section coming up. There was a huge concerted effort by opposition groups, including Saudi Arabia, Russia, Guatemala, Ethiopia, Mali, El Salvador, and the Vatican, Holy See, as an observer within the negotiations to try to block out the recognition of the importance of technology for expanding access to comprehensive sexuality education. And also interesting, a failure of the recognition between digital transformation and climate change. Thanks so much. Next slide. And so really quickly, we were actively involved, no, in the negotiation process. Almost 50 members were involved in the preparation of the technical inputs in advocating with governments. This is something that would be great to continue to improve on, no? Let's strategize on that later. Which governments we reach out to, because it's that lobby work is really important, where we submit our technical inputs. And this year we had quite a well-rounded group of governments that we were able to engage in direct lobby with, but it would be great to continue to strategize on how to raise that number, because that is the way that we can influence the negotiations. And we did provide technical inputs on 4 rounds. So as the negotiation unfolds, we continue to provide technical inputs on the updated document. Thanks so much. Next slide. And just the analysis on the language on men and masculinities, no? There was some good or substantive, shall we say, language included. It is all agreed upon language from prior resolutions, but it did recognize the full engagement of men and boys to combat and eliminate gender stereotypes, sexism, and negative social norms, and also for men and boys to reframe and condemn all forms of violence against all women and girls, and ensuring that they take responsibility and are held accountable for their behavior online and offline. And also the need to engage and educate and encourage and support men and boys to be positive role models, allies, and agents of change for gender equality. I think in terms of what was missing that we advocated for collectively is really honing in on naming of online misogyny and misogynistic groups, no, the manosphere, shall we say, and men's discrimination and violence against all women, girls, and gender non-conforming people in the digital spheres. that more nuanced and political language didn't make it in. Also, some language that we've been trying to have adopted within these processes is just the broader need for accountability of any efforts that engage men and boys to women's rights, feminist movements, LGBTIQ movements, not just of men and boys as individuals, but of all policies, programs, initiatives to have accountability at the center, for that to be for the main aim to be that women's voices, women's rights and women's voices are centered and prioritized. Also, something that we've been trying to have adopted that didn't make it is the naming of patriarchal masculinities, going from the individual level to the more systemic, and misogyny, that we witness both online and offline, as well as the ideology of men's entitlement and privilege over women, which the assertion of male control and power, that leads to normalizing and condoning and perpetuating systemic violence. So just a few of the things we did advocate for that didn't make it in, and that's a trend we're seeing, the dilution of the political edge of the language that's being adopted. So we will continue to advocate for that in future years, and more broadly, we're wanting the language to move from men and boys as individuals to the more systemic level, and that will probably continue to be a challenge in our advocacy in the coming years, but we'll continue to try. That's the end of this section. I wonder if anyone wants to jump in with any comments before we move on to the next section on opposition monitoring, which is quite rich as well, as the opposition was very active this year. But I'll pause there. If anyone has any comments, especially those, that were present, and participants, if you want to share anything, but also those who were not, if you have any questions, maybe one or two contributions, if there are any, and if not, we'll move on. I don't see any hands up, so perfect. Let's continue on to the next slide. And we're going to delve into the opposition monitoring at CSW and the tracking of anti-rights narratives, their actions and mobilization, And excited to present here my colleague. Next slide, please. Magali Marquez, who's a senior advisor at the Men Engage Global Secretariat and participant this year in the Women's Rights Caucus Opposition Monitoring Group. Magali, welcome. Thanks so much for joining. Over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. My pleasure to be with all of you here. I was not at CSW in person, but as Jenny was saying, I joined the online group that was monitoring the opposition. So it was quite intense to try to keep up with all that. And so I look forward to your comments as we move on into this section, because many of you probably had experience, seeing how this unfolded during the event. It was a very extensive opposition, as you probably saw, with the usual focus on sexuality education, on CSC, and sexual reproductive health and rights, which is the usual focus that many of this opposition takes when it comes to CSW, being something focused on women, and SRHR, being one of those areas with. But the new, which is not so new, but it has intensified over the past few years, is the focus on gender, the anti-gender approach that the opposition has taken in many parts of the world. So an anti-gender language, and the feminist movement is still trying to grasp exactly where that's heading towards. In terms of how the state members, organized around and led in some cases of the opposition, we have, from the Africa group, Mali, Senegal, Ethiopia, and who shared some statements. Nigeria being a hub for the opposition, and there were also several civil society organizations. So there are some that have been frequent participants at CSWs, as the Center for the Family, that now they call themselves Center for Human Rights and the Family, but also the Family Watch International, the World Youth Alliance, because they're trying to organize youth groups, United Families for International. So as you can see, a lot of focus on the family, and that's an important aspect of the opposition. Many of the organizations that are active in this opposition or backlash, as it's called, in many parts, has this focus on the family, which is the usual way of approaching. But what's important to highlight is how they understand the family. So family is primarily heteronormative, dual family, man and woman, like a nuclear type of family. And in that context of the family as that unit, a very biological approach to the family, with the biology functions being the default mode of the family. So they then want to protect natural forms of family planning, for instance, or parental rights of youth for sexual education or any form of information access. So things like that. And of course, anti-abortion is very important to them. But it goes beyond that. It involves fertility management in a number of ways, including in vitro fertilization, for instance, that the opposition condemns. And then the other arm of the opposition, that it's also related to what they call natural family, which is the biological form of family with the aim of procreation. So then there is the attack on LGBTIQ individuals, and particularly anti-trans narratives that they create. Some of them very conspiratorial, in the sense that civilization will end, because people will not procreate, because that's what, if everybody becomes homosexuals, and then we can't have our function of procreation and preservation of the species. So they get into some of these alarming notions, and also the whole thing about sexualizing children. So the idea that that's what the LGBTIQ community is up for, and that's also feminist women who promote a number of the empowerment of women, along with ideas about abortion rights and women's rights independent of their role in the family. All that is considered like bad women, and it's lumped all together, and those are very dangerous actors when it comes to children. So it's a very weaved scenario, but basically what we see is the anti-transgender and LGBTIQ rights, and anti-women rights. So women have to be understood within the scope of the family. So I don't know, Jenny, if I missed anything that you noticed there, or if anybody has any comment about how they experienced the situation of the opposition in New York.
Thanks so much, Magali. I think that was a great recap, of a general overview of some of the narratives of the opposition. I see a raised hand. Over to you, Alfie.
Bonjour.
Roger.
En fait, par rapport à l'opposition, je peux juste ajouter que ce que Magali vient de dire là-bas, il y a encore une opposition, par exemple ici en RDC et partout ailleurs, où nous défendons les causes des femmes, c'est en rapport avec les comportements des femmes vis-à-vis du changement progressif de leurs hommes. Disons par exemple, on forme des hommes sur la masculinité positive et directement, ces hommes-là commencent à manifester certains changements socio-culturels. Et une fois dans les ménages, il y a de ces femmes qui deviennent alors une résistance par rapport à leur mari, même dans la communauté. Et il est considéré ainsi que certains hommes qui soient mariés ou garçons, il a cette tendance d'aller changer dans la communauté. Les gens, il est stigmatisé dans sa propre communauté. Pourquoi cet homme adopte ce comportement? Pourquoi cet homme est devenu favorable à la cause de la femme? Pourquoi défend-il cette cause? Donc, il y a cette présenteur-là des normes de rétrogrades, des coutumes qui envahissent et qui ressortent alors du côté féminin. Et tu attends, par exemple, une femme qui dit à son mari, non, ne mette pas sur les travaux ménagers. Que va dire la communauté s'il voit que tu es en train de lessiver ou de torchonner dans la maison, ou même, vous voyez, même aller plus loin. Un mari qui essaie d'accompagner sa femme, disons, pour aller puiser de l'eau, c'est tout le monde qui va le critiquer dans les villages. Un mari qui ose accompagner sa femme en maternité, d'ailleurs, dans certaines communautés, c'est du tabou. Donc, il y a cette résistance-là qui pèse encore. Il faut toujours travailler et agir encore plus sur les normes et les présenteurs culturels qui sont nocifs au droit de la femme. Bien sûr, quand on parle du droit de la femme, il faut mettre aussi cette catégorie-là que vous avez précisé par rapport au LGBTIQ, qui vraiment est... ils ne sont pas vraiment de ces partis-là de l'opposition, mais ils sont, disons, ils sont la source même de l'opposition. À ce sens qu'ils se retrouvent rejetés même parfois avec leurs familles, les voisins, la communauté. C'est tout le monde qui les rejette de ce sens-là. C'est ce que j'avais juste ajouté par rapport à ce que Magali venait de parler.
Merci beaucoup, Alfie. I'm going to switch to English. I'm sorry, Alfie, but my French is not that good. But I think that's a very good point. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that. I don't see any other hands, but in case you see, Jenny, if there's somebody else wants to add. I think one interesting thing, just quickly responding to what Alfie has brought up, is that when the opposition makes the emphasis on the biological part of families, and particularly women, and the reproduction, and it also, so it is about the bodies, it's about people's bodies and what they exist for, which is understood within most of the time more religious contexts. But at the same time, there is an assumption that the family structure, the organization of the family, and the social norms, the roles, the gender roles that go, like as Alfie was saying, if a man decides to help a woman to fetch water, well, that's not what he should be doing, and that is criticized. So a number of those things that have nothing to do with the body functions or the biology become also seen as natural, as the way it's intended and it's supposed to be. So it's the logic is very confusing and very it's a creative approach that merges the biological and the social as one, and there's no separation between the body functions and and reproduction and social roles within society that necessarily, according to the way the social norms go, put women down and give men much more freedom and mobility and status. So that is part of the issue that is never really addressed by the opposition.
Thanks, Magali. Just a quick time check. We have about 5 more minutes left. Maybe we can move through the learning lessons, no, to help colleagues understand what the opposition organizing was like, both from governments and civil society, and how can we improve our skills in monitoring these actors, not just that gathered at CSW, no, with anti-rights narratives and mobilization, but to begin to make the links to the fact that these actors are operating within our own national context, if not our governments, then as regressive CSOs, no, that are within our own context. So over to you. Maybe we can move through that section. Thanks so much. Magali, over to you.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought you wanted to move into the next section. So in terms of the groups that are more organized, what we have seen more recently is like the usual, like the CFAM, which has been there for a long time, continues to be like the front of face of the opposition, because that doesn't represent a threat to anybody, and it hides that there are many other organizations and actors today behind. So as long as we keep seeing the CFAM being so vocal, we think, oh, everything is the same as it used to be from 20 years ago. But the fact is that there's much more funding available to these opposition groups. And what we have seen with a more populistic approach, anti-rights movements of the last 5 or 6 years, and the funding of these actors is the attempt to gain more influence within the United Nations systems and encounter the efforts of the gains and the establishment of some of the rights. So there are many other groups that have appeared lately. Now, some of them I had mentioned before, and they have ties with governments, and there's funding that goes around with it. So it's a very complex issue, and translates into problems not only at the United Nations, but also then later in individual countries, like we see the situation we see in Uganda right now, and elsewhere. So I don't know. I just trying to go quickly through this. Jenny, if you want to say anything else that you have heard from the opposition recently, or if anybody has more information about what they've seen.
I think just good to visualize what governments are constituting this group of friends of the family. This is now an organized group of member states that are advancing this agenda alongside CFAM, no? So that's one learning outcome perhaps that we can have today, is to begin to visualize, is my country participant in some of these spaces, no? Is CFAM active in my country, my region? Thanks, that's it from my end.
And do you have the list of all the governments that are involved with CFAM there in the slide?
Yeah, it's a
So
bit side there.
So we can see that it's a very extensive list, and it is important for people to know if they're, as Jenny was saying, if their government, is active or not within this type of coalition. which is an effort to try to, once a UN gathering occurs, how these governments align themselves and create joint statements, or they use the same language, to try to reinforce their positions.
Nothing much, Magali. It's just that we have a different version of CFAM in India, so Save the Family Foundation, and they troll us royally on our Twitter handle whenever they find content which does not align to what they think, and they have some similar ideology as well. I'm not sure how engaged they are in these processes. They might be, but we've never tried to figure that out. But they are pretty influential.
Exactly, and I think, in my view, the fact that CFAM still appears as not a big threat, because they've been around for so many years at the UN, it is kind of, it hides what's behind to some extent. And then all of a sudden we see the same narrative appearing among different governments. And I think that's what we need to be aware of, that when governments start using the same language that CFAM is using, it's not only because they are being influenced by CFAM, but there's an entire coalition of other actors behind with funding that is spearheading this type of movement.
We do have to move on shortly to the youth section, so we can stay to time. Maybe we can move through the next few slides.
Yeah, I would say that, we touched on the most important pieces. There are all these other actors within the movement. They have become much more bold over time. That's one of the things that has happened, that they're not afraid of being very extremist in their views. And they are counting on that in terms of attracting the support of certain governments or certain other actors. So that is something to be aware. There's no desire on the part of the movement to find middle ground. No, they want to be extreme, and they're counting that over time that will prevail. So there is an entire effort to be very bold, even in their methods. That if it involves money, if it involves other things, it's the attitude is more of like, why not? Because they assume that the more progressive movements have had money. That's their approach. So why not? Why shouldn't we also move this way? So it's a different, more bold approach to political activism on their part. But I would say just let's move on to the youth, Jenny, because we may come back to these things during conversations.
Yeah, sounds good. Maybe one more slide, just to hone in on the Geneva Consensus, no? Just as a quick note for you also to track if your government is participant in that, because it's one of the central efforts that anti-rights groups organize around. Next slide. Just a quick, if you can just pause here. The central aim of the Geneva Consensus, which is one of the tactics that the anti-rights groups use, is to use these very official sounding names, like this consensus was approved in Geneva at the Human Rights Council, where it's not, right? It's a means of co-opting our tactics and these official sounding processes. And the Geneva Consensus, which was first introduced by the US government, has the main aim to prevent access to abortion, where that is the position of a nation's law, And so please take a look too, is your government participant in this, and that this is a main tactic utilized, or called upon within these spaces, support for the Geneva Consensus, and just an invitation to follow up. And we're trying to improve our ability to monitor backlash from national to regional to global, and the interconnection of how these actors operate within those spaces. So if your government is participant in co-sponsoring the Geneva Consensus, just important to know. Yeah, thanks so much, Magali. I wish we had so much more time. And I think one thing I would ask is, how do we continue, maybe next slide. We'll move on to the youth section. Next slide, and we'll share this with you. Some of those pictures that you see are live. Everything we're discussing on social media, the anti-rights narratives and how they're framed. So we'll follow up with the slide deck so that you can take a look at that. Maybe on Padlet, we can just begin to brainstorm, or on the chat box, and we'll record this. What can we do to counter the backlash, and who can we partner with to do so? As Men Engage Alliance, like, what is our role? What can we do? This was obviously monitoring the opposition within CSW, but how do we strategize a little bit more deeply, about what our role is and what we can do? Who do we partner with? And yeah, just how do we take on the responsibility, beyond CSW, to continue to monitor not just the backlash at all levels, but how it's interconnecting, and share that information so that we can be more strategic. Magali, thanks so much for your time and expertise and sharing on this section. And next slide. Excited to move on to the next section as well, inviting you to continue to share your thoughts in the chat on this last section. And now on youth leadership and engagement at CSW, in advancing youth voices and agendas. Excited to present to you a group of colleagues that were present at CSW that will lead us through the next section. Next slide. And maybe here actually, Nyasha, if I pass it over to you and you want to welcome our colleagues. Wonderful. Thanks so much. Excited to hear your contributions.
Hi, everyone. Once again, thank you so much for joining us today. So we're going to take you on a journey of sharing our experiences. So my name is Nyasha Fanisa Stole. I'm a program officer with Men Engage Alliance with the Global Secretariat, and I'm also responsible for meaningful youth engagement and participation. So this year's CSW was kind of interesting for young people because the methods of work for the first time ever really recognized the need to have young people have space. So we saw the first ever interactive youth dialogue, though we had some reservations with that because it was done in parallel with another very big session where we would have loved to have the UN Secretary General join us for the interactive youth dialogue, but they had to attend another session. Then we also had a specific morning briefing, a CSO NGO morning briefing that was led by young people. So those are some of the big wins. So I'm not going to just be rambling here alone, because at CSW, we were very happy to meet with some young members, youth activists, young leaders from the Men Engage Alliance. So today I'm going to be inviting them to share their own experiences of how they experienced CSW 67 for this year, and also what kind of recommendations do they have when it comes to us to better plan as an alliance for CSW 68, and also broadly any reflections that they may have for us to strengthen youth engagement, leadership, and participation. So I will need to invite, just to mention their names, I have got Festus Kisa, who is the director at Q Initiative, and is also a Men Engage Alliance board member for the LGBTIQ rights constituents. Then we have Anastasia Munyati, who is also the executive director of Faith Arise Community Center. Then I also have Kelly Fisher, advisor from Reform Resource Center for Men from Norway. So I'd like to invite them. If you could just put on your cameras, if you're comfortable, then you could also quickly just say hi, then we can deep dive into our conversation. So Festus, are you here? I see Kelly. Kelly, you can go ahead and say hi to everyone.
Yes, hello everyone. I spoke a little bit earlier and I realized that I forgot to say where I was from. But that's all right. Now here I am again. But yes, excited to share some thoughts along with everyone else here.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Anastasia?
Hi, Nyasha. Hi, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to just share my experience of the CSW and being the first time that I was attending. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Festus?
Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm Festus. I'm from Kenya, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So I will actually start with Festus. Just please have the floor to share with us what was your experience at CSW 67. What would you want people to take away from this session, particularly focusing on your engagement as a young person and as a youth leader? Over to you, Festus.
Thank you very much. I wasn't expecting to be the first one, but I have a couple of points that I hope of things that stood out for me. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed was the opportunity to meet with people that I'm in committees with. I know that ever since the pandemic, we have been in various engagements like the youth reference group. We've had many meetings, the global advocacy working group, and like the Soji learning circle. So just being in the space and also meeting the secretariat, it's something that we don't take for granted. You guys do a lot of work. So being in a space where we can learn and share and interact was really stood out for me. I also liked how it was an opportunity for us to meet other global leaders, thought leaders in the world, like with young people and, government, and like I've met several CEOs that I really look up to and feminists. So I really like that. And they were accessible, like in the past, you'd have to book appointments, but here it's someone who you're in the same room with, or, like even Bafana, the CEO, the director of Sonke, these are people you don't have access to. So having a chance to learn from them and hear and listen to them speak really was impactful as a young person. And we got to interact. I think the youth session that you chaired, and we had youth reference group members taking part in it and asking questions and interrogating how, what you can do globally, what are the collective actions you can take. And I remember we had Kelly participating, and we had participants from Rwanda who participated virtually. I thought that was really cool. I really liked that it was virtual, like it was hybrid, because New York weather was not favorable for everyday physical meetings. I remember temperatures up to -1, and in the negative, so that was a little difficult. But the fact that we had the planning was in such a way that there were physical sessions and there were still virtual sessions ongoing through the day. That was great advocacy. I faced certain challenges, and I think the first one was because the sessions are so great, you want to attend as many as you can, which is really exhausting given that there's like changing weather and like there's jet lag and time zone differences. So I think maybe moving forward, you can start maybe when you're preparing people to attend sessions, it would be how do we divide the work? Like what are our areas of interest? How do you also provide feedback sessions to ourselves so that even if I missed a session, I'd still be like, oh, yeah, Nyasha, you went to this session. How was that about? So yeah, I think that coordination would be great so that at the end of the day, you still even have time to reflect on the learnings, because everyone is sharing best practices. You want to learn so much. So you keep running from meeting to meeting, you don't get a chance to reflect on these lessons or to even just network and build collaborations. Access to the main UN building, I thought that was also a challenge, especially for those who, we had not really planned how, what do I say? Like if we had planned earlier, I knew who was going to represent us, which would have been easier to even get like the grounds the UN's passed, which I thought was, if we can think about that moving forward. I liked how it was an opportunity and also a challenge, how as young people you are seen as one thing, as a monolith, yet, you know, like yet there are so many other areas that you could have been in. Like the youth session was just a standalone event. And yet, if you go to other places, like it was, and we have youth in that, they have youth who work in climate justice, youth who work in, you know, who are part of active women's rights, youth from rural areas, LGBTQ youth. But the fact that we did not give, you would only go to such spaces, you'd only speak about youth issues in a youth session. I felt like that was a challenge because everyone else was very like, oh, if they're talking about access to technology, you're supposed to be one thing in that room. So all the roles that you carry, you have to leave them and be in this room as one particular thing. So maybe we can unpack that at Men Engage and know how best do we ensure that people in all their fullness are in the rooms and they can speak to a variety of things that affect them, because even if you tell me these are youth issues, I'm still faced by other issues. Yeah. And sorry, I keep looking at my notes. Oh yeah, opportunities for collaboration. That is something that I think we should also just and it's something that maybe we can give opportunities to, like, just asking someone, what exactly do you want for yourself for this, so that you're able to, like, as much as you're doing things for the network, you're also saying, okay, so a personal goal for me would be to learn 1, 2, 3, 4, so that it's also like capacity building initiative, because sometimes you're so immersed in the work, you know, how do you advocate or do better, but then there's not, you'd forget to focus on your personal growth or whatever you want to as a takeaway from that. So is it a connection you want to make? Is it a network? Like, is it, how are you going to benefit for yourself? And of course, the issue of safety. And they know that maybe someone else will speak about it, especially for like young feminists and LGBTQ people who do not have access to spaces, and also, you know, there with the anti-rights movement infiltrating spaces which you thought that was safe, and not being able to safely identify as an LGBT person when you're speaking to your like country delegations and things, because you don't know their attitudes. And so maybe that's also something that we can actually think about. Like, I know the organizers do their best. They give us the, you know, safety manuals, even during the webinars, detailing or the kind of language that can be used. But now what happens when you have been violated, or when you feel like this space is not safe for you to participate? And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Nyasha. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Festus, for sharing your experiences. I'll come back to you when I will be asking for you to share just one big recommendation that you would want everyone here who is part of the Alliance or not part of the Alliance to think about as we plan for CSW 68. So at this point, I'll invite Anastasia to share with us your own experiences, perceptions, your learnings, etc. Over to you, Anastasia.
Thank you, Nyasha. So I think I'll just quickly jump into, first of all, I appreciated attending CSW. And the one thing that I really appreciated the most about it was the fact that it was a hybrid event this time. I mean, for the first time, it was a hybrid event, which gave all of us an opportunity to be there physically and attend the meetings in physical spaces, but also an opportunity for those, an opportunity for those people who couldn't afford to get visas to be able to attend. And I'm not sure whether I should go into this now. I've just said visas, and I'm thinking there are quite a number of young people who would have wanted to attend CSW, but because of for some of them, it was going to be a first time traveling, their financial capacity couldn't allow them to, and then the visa deniers. So if there's one recommendation that I would give in that category would be, if there's a way the Men Engage network could facilitate the acquiring of visas, especially for young people, rather than young people getting them and doing the process on their own, outside of men engaged just doing letters of recommendation to embassies. I think it would be better for the men engaged network itself to actually, can you hear me? Yeah, to actually do and help the whole way to facilitate young people getting their visas. So yeah, so since it was a hybrid event, it was a good thing. People were still able to attend online and both physically. That's number one. So that in itself, being able to attend physically, for me, it gave me an opportunity to interact with different people from all walks of life, different NGOs, CSOs, government institutions, and government agencies that I would not be able to interact with if I had to attend the event online. So the networking opportunities gave us opportunities to begin conversations around creating sustainable partnerships and collaborations with different kinds of organizations with whom we work around the same thematic areas. The other thing was being a CSW also showed me how the youth were being involved in these events. I remember attending quite a number of events, side events that were filled with young people, and it sort of gave meaning to the fact that now we are focusing on meaningful youth engagement. However, is the meaningful youth engagement only ending at youth and young people being able to attend these events, or are they actually contributing to policy development? Are they actually contributing to meaningful advocacy and bringing about the change that we need to see in the gender equality spaces, and especially regarding to sexual and reproductive health rights and digital technology, issues to do with access? Are we ensuring that youth actually have inclusive access to most of these events and activities, and even leadership? Are they able to bring out the conversations and the dialogue that they need to actually bring out on the table? People that are in leadership, policymakers, who in most cases, especially for the African continent, people that are in leadership positions, politicians, or are elderly people, way above 40, way above the youth category. So can they hear young people? Can young people really bring about meaningful conversations and meaningful impact and change? So talking about inclusive youth engagement, I don't remember seeing any young people or persons with disability at CSW. So I'm not sure where we left those. I don't know whether we are still just talking about it and not acting on it, because is it that they don't exist in our spaces, or we are just not including them in these engagements? So a recommendation on that would be, let's ensure that we are actually not leaving anyone behind, regardless of whether somebody has a disability or not. Persons with disabilities need to be included in the spaces where young people are concerned. So youth advocacy, youth and young people access to technology and the internet. We live in a continent where young people do not have access. So how are we going to ensure that we live around seeing the realization of the recommendations and the outcomes of CSW, where including young people is concerned in access to technology, and especially young women and girls in science, technology, and the final thing would be navigating spaces at CSW. It wasn't easy, especially for a first timer. There's too much that's going on there. There's a lot of activity. It's like, I remember when I went to get my ground pass, the queue was from this end to that end. And I was like, wait, how am I supposed to get this done? So nobody is telling you what to do. You have to figure it out on your own. So we need to, as men engage, especially when we're bringing in young people for the first time, give them proper orientation on how to go about getting things done. So I remember there were young people on the queue who didn't have that letter from the UN Women that they needed to get their IDs, and they had to go back running around to get those printed. So if people are well informed, they'll prepare in advance. Because at the end of the day, we young people have problems with reading. There's so much to read, and we need to be able to have these orientation meetings way ahead of CSW. I think that would really be helpful to help young people to navigate these spaces. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're doing there, you might find yourself in all these spaces and you wouldn't have gotten anything meaningful at the end of your time at CSW. I submit.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. So I will pass on the mic to Kelly. Over to you, Kelly, to also share your experiences.
I agree with a lot of the things that Anastasia and Festus have said. And I guess just taking up for me, something that it was my first time going to CSW. In my organization reform, two of my colleagues were on the delegation for Norway. And this was the first year where we brought along a few others, and reform does not have a consultative status with the UN. So there was just some kind of like misunderstanding within what we had access to and did not have access to. And so for me, I felt like the first couple of days of CSW were just dominated by just trying to understand what I could go into or not go into. And it just ate up a lot of my headspace more than I would have wanted to. I could very much relate to what you said, Anastasia, about, one day I stood in the line for an hour and a half, and then I got to the front of the line and they were like, nope, actually, this is not the line, or you can't get into here today or something. Which was, a very demotivating experience when you're supposed to be, hopefully at this at this event where you have the chance to meet with and go to lots of inspiring panels. And so that was kind of a demotivating experience. For me, it was really, but I also realized that comes from a total space of privilege also to even be having the ability to go to New York and to have been there in person, which I realized that not everyone even has the chance to for different reasons. Something else that I kind of, I know Anastasia, you highlighted a bit about, it was great that it was a hybrid this year, and completely agree, but I felt like with some of the spaces, especially the UN church building, it was a horrible space for hybrid events. I felt like there was not the kind of technological support that was given to actually facilitate a hybrid event, which meant that for the people in the room, it was challenging, and it was also kind of unfair to the people who were not there. And also especially ironic, considering that this year's theme was about technology, and then you had all these I think I watched 10 different sessions get struggle with trying to figure out a hybrid setup. So I think those were kind of some not to start off as super negative, but I think those were just some things that I kind of took away from how they kind of impacted the ability for NGOs events to actually facilitate meaningful events in a proper way, which I think is disappointing and something that I would hope change in the future. So we'll see. And I guess I really appreciated specifically the role that the Men Engage Alliance played in kind of creating a space for kind of more informal debriefing for myself and others from my organization. I think when it comes to youth engagement, I hadn't thought too much about this topic prior to it. I think thinking about for the future is something. I know that Norway, for example, had a youth delegate on for the delegation. I think it could have been interesting for myself or some of my other younger colleagues to kind of reach out to that person beforehand and make ourselves known. I just so those are some different thoughts, but I'll wrap up there because I know you have some other questions, Nyasha. So
Great. Thank you so much, Festus, Anastasia, and Kelly. So I also see quite a lot of comments in the chat. So at this point, I'm left with about 4 minutes. And I'd like to invite, if there's anybody who is listening would want to weigh in their own thoughts and experiences, and particularly if you're a young person, this is our space and our time. And also, if you have any recommendations right now on how we can do better for the next CSW, please kindly also type them in the chat. Because for me, I think the space was great. It was good, and I was happy to be at there in person. But like I mentioned, how the challenges for young people keep on happening. For example, visa issues, and I guess that comes back from our issue around how do we plan to support young people during CSW. So the pre-engagement sometimes is not happening because, well, most organizations get to decide very late into the process that probably it's now early February. That's when there's the thinking, oh, we can have young people. So the hurrying up for visas and everything might not be very tangible. So probably as we organize, start to think about what are we planning for as we get to CSW 68. Once the registration is open, then things that start flowing right now to give us enough time to pray each other. Can be a very overwhelming space, but I also think it's good for learning and to also amplify the youth voices and getting connected. So as we go forward, going to be some connections that we can make with the Young Feminist Caucus, because after 2 years of being silent or not working, of not coordinated properly, it's starting to come up very well. So those are some of the spaces that we look to influence as young people. So I don't see any hands up for anyone to make a comment. So I'll quickly just pass back this mic again in this order to say, starting with you first, is if there's one thing that the Men Engage Alliance can actually do to ensure that there's meaningful youth engagement and participation for young people at CSW, what is it that you would want us to prioritize, or what is it that you would want us as an alliance to actually advocate for, make maybe the CSW space more meaningful, more youth-friendly? Over to you, Kisa, in a minute. All right, I don't see Kisa, so I think I can throw this question to you, Kelly.
Yes, I think well, I really appreciate that there was something for youth, Men Engaged. I think that was a really great initiative there. I think, Anastasia, you talked about pre-meetings beforehand. I know that there were some that were organized this year, but I wasn't able to participate in those, unfortunately, due to other conflicts. But I agree that maybe if there was some possible more opportunities for that, I know that could be something that could have really helped me from a Men Engaged perspective. I think also an event specifically, if there's a panel or a topic that's relevant that is specifically with youth members from Men Engage, I think that can be also a really great way to boost youth perspectives. I think, for example, that this year was a really great topic or opportunity compared to other years in terms of a youth perspective when it's about technology, where, for example, a lot of these new technologies or new apps, young people are more familiar with or use them more often, or the issues are more impacting them. I think in the context of Norway, at least with TikTok, TikTok is heavily only used by youth. So then it makes sense to then get some youth perspectives on that and what trends they see and what that means. So I think that could be a possibility, is that a specific panel with youth members could be of interest.
So in my own language, we always say Zokororo ine simba, meaning when you re-emphasize it, it still has some more punch. But okay, thank you so much. I think we picked that point around the pre-preparations for CSW for young people, and it's well noted. We did have some pre-sessions, but I guess we can be very intentional to ensure that we reach out and understand from our networks how many people are coming, and we're very intentional in bringing you on board and supporting each other to make the space more friendly, more comfortable, and to really amplify the meaningful engagement. So thank you so much, guys, Kelly, Anastasia, and there's Festus. In a minute, Festus, otherwise Jenny will mute our microphones. Over to you, Festus.
So I have a quick question. Sorry, I dropped off. But my suggestion would be involving the country networks in planning, such that it's not just the responsibility of the global so that if we're going to get resources, so it becomes also part of the national agenda and not just the global agenda. So that would be a very great way, and it would also give people time to prep, time to like it will be easier for us to make in-country connections. Like for example, when Anastasia talked about getting visas and etc. If we can make this discussion, if we can make these networks at country level such that maybe Kenya Men Engage has a strong relationship with the US Embassy in Nairobi, that it will be easier for us to, for young people to apply for this. If countries, for example, if maybe America, Men Engage Alliance does not have the ECOSOC status, we can have other partners with ECOSOC status so that young people can get UN's grounds pass. Let's localize this as much as possible so that it's even easier for us to even, we can be part of like the larger national delegation and such things. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Festus, and everyone for listening to us. Passing you back the baton, Jennifer, and yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nyasha, Anastasia, Kelly, and Festus. And just noting, we recorded all of your recommendations in the Padlet, as well as Carlin. Thank you for sharing many recommendations as well. Christine and John. So we have recorded all of those in the Padlet. Appreciate it. And Nyasha, just seeing a comment that there's no access to the global youth recommendations. Maybe we can adjust that setting. And the global youth recommendations were an effort to compile recommendations from youth globally. There was thousands of recommendations that made it onto this collective global agenda, shall we say, for CSW. So it's an interesting document to look at. Quite powerful political youth agenda, no? Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Jenny, just a quick response to that. So the document, you can open it and view it and even download, but you cannot edit. So I think the access that's written is request edit access. So if you're just interested, it's not allowed to be editable, but if you can open it, you can download it, you can read it.
Thanks so much. I wonder if we can share it in the chat. Maybe some colleagues are having trouble even downloading it, no? I'll check it out now. And yeah, thanks so much for your leadership. Really strong recommendations that we will integrate into our planning for CSW 68, which we're about to get to. But first, and maybe Bianca, if you don't mind sharing screen. Maybe before we move into CSW 68 as the last portion of our conversation today, noting that our planning for any CSW session begins way ahead of time. We just ended CSW 67. And so now what? What happens? A lot of time and resources and energy and political will went into CSW 67. What do we do now? What's our post-CSW advocacy and follow-up? Also, do we need to connect with the organizers of CSW to provide any feedback? No, we have a wonderful strategy segment now. Next slide, and really lucky to have our colleague Rumbi, who's going to lead us through this. So Rumbi, over to you. Thanks so much for your expertise on this.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you. And thank you for the colleagues who are on the call. Thank you for really making the time to come through and discuss and strategize. My name is Rumbi Elizabeth Chidori, and I'm the Regional Policy and Advocacy Coordinator for Sonke Gender Justice and Men Engage. I am based in the Johannesburg office in South Africa. I'm just going to take you through on some of the actions that we can take, some of the strategies that we can do post CSW. Just as Jenny, I must apologize. Sorry that I could not put my video on. I'm actually using my mobile because I'm in South Africa and we have load shedding at the moment. So in terms of what we can do post CSW, we know that the principal output from the CSW session in itself is the agreed conclusions. And once countries have received the agreed conclusions, that what we'd like to see is that these conclusions are translated into policies and actions at country level and at regional level. And we want to see that countries implement what is contained and the recommendations that are contained within the agreed conclusions. And once they have done that, it is important that they report to the ECOSOC committee on what they have done in relation to the theme at the agreed annual session. So it's important to advocate for legislation and other reforms to implement the recommendations within the agreed conclusions. It's also important that we engage in consultation as civil society organizations with government and other actors or development partners and private sector as well to participate in the implementation of these recommendations. It's important that we also monitor the implementation of these recommendations, and if we can, also be able to contribute to written reports to the CSW or to the ECOSOC committee in terms of following through what has been implemented, following through to see what government has done, following through to see what are the gaps, what needs to be done, what more needs to be done to ensure that the recommendations are implemented fully. It's also important that we document and report on human rights situations within our country that relate to the accepted recommendations and any other emerging human rights violations in preparation for the next CSW 68, which will also be covered when we talk about the next session, which will be happening next year. It's also important to contribute by writing written statements, and this often happens ahead of the CSW session. So for instance, for CSW 68, you'd find that the requests for written statements from CSOs will be made in this year. So it's important to always be on the lookout for those and be able to contribute by writing written statements. It's also important to use the adopted language in policy making and policy proposals. Although I will say that for this year also it was a little bit difficult because the theme, which was on digital technologies, was a theme which was new with respect to for women's rights organization. So in terms, it was a little bit tricky in terms of the adopted language for this particular theme. But we do have adopted language for other themes, for example, around sexual and reproductive health rights, comprehensive sexuality education. We do have adopted language that relates to these, and it's important that we continue to make use of this language within policy making when our governments call for our input in certain particular laws or certain particular policies. It's important that we ensure that we make use of these adopted language within these policies and localize that language within our national structures. It's also important that we continue to advocate for the inclusion of men and boys as agents of change for gender equality. Can we go to the next slide, please? I'm not sure how much time I have, but I know it's not much, but perhaps we can have just a question that I could pose where I'm going to kindly ask if there are any participants within the room who can name or reflect on one example from their country where their government has actually implemented an action arising from a previous CSW agreed conclusion, or any follow-up advocacy by an NGO or CSO or their organizations arising from previous CSW agreed conclusions. I'm going to share one. I'll start off by sharing one with, in particular, to South Africa. I think they did get a recommendation around women's empowerment this was arising from CSW, which happened in, I'm not sure what the session was. It happened in 2016. And in response to that recommendation, South Africa has indicated that post COVID, all of the procurement must include 40% of procurement.
Rumbi, I think you dropped off. I don't know if for other colleagues as well. Yeah, Karen, thanks for that. I think it might be the power. We were going to hear an example, no, from the South African context, but maybe we just open up here. Any other examples until Rumbi gets back? Have you actually experienced, no, within your own context, follow-up on CSW advocacy by your government, or you as an NGO or NGOs within your country context? Open it up to participants. Let me see, there's some comments in the chat. Yeah, about Rumbi's. Oh, here she is. One moment.
I'm sorry, my network just dropped. What was the last you heard from me?
Yeah, just the recommendations that had come in to South Africa. You were beginning to explain the case study, no? So go for it.
Okay, so South Africa was requested in terms of it was CSW that happened in I think it was the 60th session, and that their recommendation was on women's empowerment and the link to sustainable development. And in response to that, and this was post-COVID, the public, all governmental organizations were required to set aside 40% of public procurement for women-owned businesses so that they can broaden women's economic participation. So there was an instruction actually from the presidency that all national departments must monitor and must report on the number of women who have participated in these public procurement processes. So that's just an example. So I'm putting the question to participants if you have similar examples.
I'm just gonna share in the chat. There's a wonderful document, no, which I think is useful on many ends by NGO CSW. It's like a training toolkit, and there's some really good concrete examples of feminist colleagues advocating on post CSW follow-up. And I think maybe just I'll share that in the chat. But I think also the absence of some good examples by members is a good call to understand how we can use the outcomes as follow-up, and that they sometimes seem a bit remote to our national work, but it's like an additional layer of pressure, that we can put on our national government by saying you agreed to this in the international space, and to pull that into our national advocacy messaging, no? So also
absolutely. Absolutely, you're quite right, Jenny. I think that's part of the importance of why we are having this debriefing session, is so that we can really actually link what is happening at global level to what is happening at national level, and ensure that the agreed recommendations are not only sitting at global level, but we actually, localize them, actually require our governments to implement, to monitor, and to report in terms of what they have done towards these agreed conclusions, because we don't want to keep going around the same issues over and over and over again. So it's important that we really localize, make use of these agreed conclusions. A lot of negotiation goes through into really, making these documents, and they shouldn't just be shelved. We need to bring them to life, and we can do this by ensuring that we put pressure on our governments to ensure that they localize and they implement these agreed conclusions. Next slide, please. This is going to be my last slide. And we can also reach out to other actors. These are UN Women, United Nations Secretary General, the CSW chair, the NGO CSW as well. In terms of organizing and engaging with them pre-CSW and post-CSW. As we were going along today, we were mentioning several things that we noted that we would like to change, for instance, in terms of just understanding the processes and being involved in the planning stages, the planning for the CSW, and also ensuring that young people are involved not just at the session itself, but pre the session, and post in the session itself, and post the session. Anastasia actually mentioned one of the key things that we've been talking about with relation to inclusivity. On our delegation, we did have a woman who was in a wheelchair and required wheelchair access to some of the buildings and some of the meeting places where meetings were taking place. And before she had left her country, she had been given the impression that the UN will be assisting with regard to wheelchair access and ensuring that she can be able to be part of the conversations that will be taking place. But once she got there, she did not receive that assistance. And we did try to do a follow-up with UN Women, only to be told that the UN Women does not give wheelchairs or does not give that kind of assistance. So you see, there was some kind of miscommunication, and that resulted in her not being able to attend some of the sessions because she was using crutches, and some of the places were bit too far for her to walk. So these are real examples and real issues that people have, and which we need to continue to bring to attention of the UN, and request them, and also call for accountability, because who is going to be responsible if someone has been given the impression that they are going to be assisted, and then when they arrive in a foreign country, they do not get that assistance? So that is something that we really want to continue following up on, and we would like to see a change with regard to that. We also want to talk about, there has been a call for CSW to be held in other regions, because we have been talking about how difficult it is to get visas to the United States. It's not always an easy thing. And one of the biggest challenge is actually funding to get some of the visas, and funding for the flights and accommodation. New York is a very expensive city, and we've seen organizations, particularly this year, we've had African feminists who mobilized and arranged a pre-CSW session, which was held here in Africa. And this is really to really call to attention of the CSW to say, why don't we rotate where the CSW is going to be held? It shouldn't just be in New York. Let it rotate so that we can have more people who can be able to access the sessions and get involved with advocacy at CSW. and really get organizations, particularly that are unable to raise those particular funds that are required, particularly in terms of accommodation and all the processes required in terms of visa access, so that they can be able to be part of these very, very key and critical conversations. There are a lot more access-related barriers, which also include language inclusivity. You find that most of the documents, most of the flyers, most of the session itself, the CSW session is held in English, and it's not all who attend are able to understand English. So it's important that we ensure that we have language inclusivity, and we are able to ensure that all the documents, the agreed conclusions are also interpreted in languages that people will be able to understand. I think that will be very, very, very helpful. So these are some of the things that we can follow up with our governments, follow up with the organizers for CSW, and try to see if these things can be changed. And I'm going to end here and just ask if there are any questions. Please do come through.
Ruby, we have a raised hand. Urvashi, over to you.
So I just, because this was being shared, I just thought of a couple of other points which I felt more strongly and more pronounced in this year's CSW. One being that all the parallel events are extremely expensive. They've all been now, you have to pay for it to organize it. Even virtual events are relatively expensive when you pay in dollars. So I'm not sure how many women's rights organizations have so much of fund that they could probably give that money to host even a virtual event. And in case you're doing an in-person event, the cost goes up. Yeah,
absolutely.
So I personally was extremely disappointed with the way this space has been monetized, and it leaves out a lot of voices when you monetize it like this. I don't remember seeing it like this a few years back, but this year it was more pronounced. I think the other point that was reflective was some of the negotiation spaces are so restrictive that it is very difficult. The women's rights organizations are almost on the sidelines. Yeah, they're there as tokens to be represented in some of the official side events. If you have, inroads with any of the UN Women team members, or people know your work, then there might be a space for you to speak, but it is more a tokenistic voice. And it was also reflected in the 8th March event that was held within the UN HQ office. And I know because Jenny and I both were there, and we were so disappointed that we walked off from the event midway, and we were happy that we were not sitting in the main hall. And this year specifically, it was so difficult to get passes for UN HQ grounds. There were long queues. People made multiple attempts. They had to stand for 4 to 5 hours in line in the cold to get a pass, a UN ground pass, which I felt was very, very disheartening, because you begin your journey to the space where you feel that this will be a more equitable space, but everywhere you see is inequity through and through. So thoroughly disappointed. After I came back, I was not very sure I would like to attend the next one, honestly, because we don't see our governments chip in. And sorry, I'm ranting right now, so I'll hand it back.
No, you're quite right. You're quite right. Really, it's really very, very important. I feel that also, CSW cannot be successful if we continue to reproduce the same, access barriers that are already prevalent within a patriarchal society. It's important that, feminist spaces must be accessible. Feminist spaces must be inclusive. And, whether it relates to funding, whether it relates to logistics, to accessibility, feminist spaces must demonstrate that it is not only the perspectives of, those that have privilege or the privilege that should contribute to policies. CSW should be inclusive and it must be accessible. And you're quite right. You're quite right. It is very disheartening and disappointing to experience this. So I'm going to end here. Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you very much, colleagues, for your attention and for listening to me. Thank you. And engaging. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jenny.
Thanks so much, Rumbi and Urvashi, for your critical reflections. I've jotted them all in the Padlet. Let's just wrap up rather quickly then. So let's see, CSW 68, the road ahead and our collective strategizing. Next slide, which is just, I'm Jennifer. I work with the Global Secretariat. Great to connect with you. Next slide. And maybe most importantly, what's the theme for CSW 68? No, and it's accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing for gender perspective. So important opportunity, not only to address poverty, but also to begin to unpack some of those more systemic dimensions, to gender injustice. So it'll be an important theme. Next slide. I'm going to share in the chat in one moment. This is from a training toolkit by Choices for Youth. It's a really good graphic that just visualizes the cycle of preparation for CSW, And if you can see at the bottom triangle is we're in CSW, all the activities that happen. Then we're moving up and around after CSW. Rumbi was able to really unpack that for us. It's like as soon as CSW ends, we have this window, like let's say April, May, June, July, even until August, where there's active pressure where we can really utilize the outcomes of CSW to hold our governments to account, to utilize the outcomes of CSW for our advocacy, not just at national, but at regional level, not just at regional level, but utilizing what happened at CSW if we're going to be in Geneva at the Human Rights Council, propelling different international spaces even to look at what happened in one space and to try to progress what's happening in another. So there's a lot of ways. But really quickly, if we're looking at CSW for next year, the next session will be in March of 2024, but really our organizing begins in September of this year. And some of the first organizing that takes place is in September. The CSW Bureau will meet and they'll begin to convene the expert working group meetings. And that's a really important opportunity that we've never engaged in, but maybe something we can strategize for next year, which is that there's an opportunity for civil society to provide inputs upon this year's theme. And if we do that quite early, in September, when the expert group meeting takes place, which is really a selection of experts from around the world on that year's particular theme, there's also an opportunity for civil society to just provide technical inputs, and we've never tried to influence that early in the process, but it's something we could consider this year. The expert working group report goes to the UN Secretary General, who writes his report, and then that report is what the zero draft of the agreed conclusions is based on. So it's sort of a chain of trying to influence how the analysis is carried out on that particular year's theme. Also, there's regional preparatory processes, no? So those begin, it's very varied. They're not set yet. They become agendized, shall we say, through the deliberations of the various ECOSOC regional mechanisms, but usually take place between November and February. And so that's another thing we had brainstormed in the caucus meetings this year. We had 1 year in the preparation for the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, where we had, I believe it was 4 or 5 different regions organized and participating in the regional preparatory conferences and advocating for strong political and nuanced language on men and masculinities, which made it into the regional document, and then that was compiled into the global. So it was quite a successful year for interconnected advocacy as an alliance, no? Maybe something we can consider this year is how do we disseminate information and participate in those regional preparatory processes. And then we've heard today, no, a strong call for support on visas. And I think maybe it's something we need to consider even in September when we're moving through this wheel of preparation. September is where we begin to strategize and think for CSW 68 on some of these more time-bound issues, no? And then entering into November and December, there's already concrete processes like submitting a statement to be read at CSW. Some of the application processes begin. So maybe, yeah, and please write in the chat if you have recommendations, no? But maybe one of the recommendations is to check in September already for CSW 68 and have an informal strategy call then to begin to line up all the elements, no, of how we prepare and support each other way ahead of time, no? As once we enter the new year, it becomes quite a run up to CSW and less ability to influence and coordinate, no, towards the process. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. I had zoomed in. The graphic was a bit small. Yeah, and I think maybe some key thoughts are like there's also national processes, no? So it's like not just engaging in the regional agenda setting process leading into CSW where the regional blocks consolidate their position, but it's also how to support members in understanding how to engage within the national process, whether that's asking to be part of the official delegation, participating in consultation meetings. So there's some elements of preparatory work that we need to do there at different levels before we even get to CSW. So maybe in September or even October, having a meeting to raise capacities on all of this. And then internal coordination and support. Visa is a great example. Festus, you were raising support with reaching out to the embassies. There's an element here of our road to CSW, which is our own internal coordination and support for each other, no? You had also raised a great point of like, how do we host that at the national level too, no? Like supporting members within the national level to be active in these processes. And then the political influencing, no? Which is, as I was mentioning, maybe we can try next year to influence the agenda earlier on and see how that goes, no? Centering in a meaningful way, no, rich analysis on men and masculinities earlier on in the process. Thanks. And next slide. This is what I was referring to our last slide. Thanks for your patience, but we do continue to seek to interconnect our advocacy. It's very challenging. It's, I think, one of the biggest hurdles to being able to even, for example, counter the backlash, right? To put pressure on our governments, policymakers, decision makers, power holders, because in some ways it's calling upon us to have the capacity to and have the coordination to put pressure at the right time in the right mechanism or space, and for us to be communicating and elegantly being able to coordinate that process. And so interconnected advocacy is really a call for us to continue to be able to mature that process as an alliance, which involves, of course, national advocacy. We just had 50 members at CSW. We're hosting all of these collective learning series so that we can all understand better the processes that took place. How do we bring the outcomes of CSW to national level to influence at that in those spaces? Then at the regional level, we have organized regional advocacy working groups as spaces to continue to center the strategic thinking of a region around advocacy. How do we connect the regional advocacy working groups to some of these regional preparatory CSW processes? How do you and you as a member of a region, connect to your regional advocacy working group? And then we also organize at global level as the Global Advocacy Working Group, which is representative of all regions. There's a rep, an advocacy working group rep for each region, and some at-large members of the alliance too as a strategic body. How do we continue to connect all of these levels so that we can have the most influence, and coordinate accordingly? Share your thoughts in the chat if you do have any thoughts on preparation for CSW 68 and any strategizing. And as you finalize your inputs, next slide. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all of you for joining the session, and especially thank you to all regions, all participants who have been really actively involved in putting on these collective learning sessions. It's our third one under the CoLab initiative, and really as a open space for us to collectively unpack, strategize, and learn together about CSW. So a big thank you to all collaborators who have been a part of this series, and to all of you for joining. Thanks to the interpreters as well for all of your support in these sessions. And yeah, thank you so much. We continue in September with CSW 68. Thank you very much.